Ready when you are.
Hello, John.
Matt, how are you?
I'm all right, thanks. I'm all right. How and where are you? Are you stuck in the attic? What's going on here?
Help! Save me! Save me! No, I'm in the annex of a gîte. I'm with my family in France, having a lovely little Easter break.
Very nice.
It's very good to be back talking about Doctor Who though, and a new series with Ncuti Gatwa and the gang.
Oh, is that what we're here to talk about?
What does the gang look like? It's a new setup, although obviously it's only the second series of the latest run. So be interesting to touch base on what's changed, what hasn't changed, especially after what was, I suppose, quite a lukewarm, at best, sort of response to the first series. So yeah, be interesting to discuss with you how we both feel it kind of kicks on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, this is only the second ever time that we have done a sort of volcanic hot take on a brand new episode of Doctor Who. Hot take. Last time, of course, being at Christmas, where you were also in France. So I do have to ask the question, do you always make it a matter of policy to leave the country when new Doctor Who's coming on?
Just in case I have a particularly terrifyingly boiling take on it. Yes, I suppose it'd be best to be in a more rural location. No, the happenstance.
Yeah.
But I'm here. I'm ready. We as we say, I'll explain later. This is I'll explain now. So
I'll explain now.
We reserve the right to return to this at some point,
Or at least
when
I'll explain within a 24-hour window of original broadcasts or something like that. Yeah, absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, this is something that I'm sure, like a lot of what we do on I'll Explain Later is about taking the sort of long view of Doctor Who and sort of what it is to watch, sometimes extremely old episodes of the show with quite a bit of a distance. And we will be coming back to these episodes, I'm sure, in the fullness of time when the dust settled and there's a whole new era of Doctor Who for everyone to hate on. I'm sure we'll come back to this and look at it in a bit more detail. But I think so. For the next 8 weeks, we're going to be talking about the new series as it goes out. This means that obviously episodes will likely be dropping on Sundays now. But like I say, if it's good enough for Chris Chibnall, it's good enough for I'll Explain Later. In terms of a change of schedule. So anyway, we're kicking off with the first episode of series 2 of Disney Doctor Who, if you like. The second and maybe final series, but I'm sure we'll come to that. It's called The Robot Revolution. John, do you want to attempt a quick summary of the plot?
Wow. Okay. Well, I was going to go through some. So obviously, if anybody does listen back to this much later on, it was broadcast on the 12th of April or released on the 12th of April 2025.
Yeah.
This first episode of the second series of Ncuti Gatwa, obviously Russell T Davies is the showrunner, but he's written this. It's his name on the script, directed by Peter Hoare, and obviously Ncuti Gatwa as the Doctor. You've got Murray Gold back with the music, and we're introducing Belinda Chandra, the new companion played by Varada Sethu. So that's what this episode needs to do, right? It needs to introduce her, get her into the TARDIS, and then set things up. So that's broadly speaking what happens. There's an opening scene. So Sethu's character, Belinda Chandra, is a nurse. So we pick her up in a hospital doing hospital and nursey things. Very, very, very reminiscent of Smith and Jones from series 3, I think, of the New Who era back in, what would that have been, 2007, I guess.
Yeah, 7.
Montage sequence of what her life is like. The Doctor sort of chasing around, trying to find her, and then she gets zapped up to a planet, and the Doctor chases, and it turns out that an adolescent relationship that she'd had, in that relationship with a bloke called Al, he bought her one of those laughable certificates that means that her name, Belinda Chandra, is linked to that of a star, and with wearying / charming delete to taste inevitability, the star system acknowledges this as real, decides that she's the kind of queen of this star system and of a particular planet, and the robots there take this to its obvious sort of logical Forbidden Planet-esque conclusion. I mentioned Forbidden Planet. This is writ large with 50s stylings.
The very Tintin on the moon style rockets, which I made a note of, which I thought were lovely.
Yeah, and there's a kind of Forbidden Planet vibe to the robots, although there's also a bit kind of King Hydroflax in there as well, I thought. But yeah, there's definitely a 50s vibe, right down to the sort of the tiny cleaning robot going polish, which seemed to have a kind of 50s convertible vibe to it. And of course the next episode, riffing way ahead to I'll explain in the future. The next episode is also set in the 50s, and it's quite an interesting sort of, at a time when Donald Trump has returned to the White House, which obviously wasn't the case when this was filmed, but it's interesting that both this story and the next story have this very heavy 50s aesthetic to them. Another era when the United States in particular was struggling with its modern identity. Kansas versus the Board of Education, 1954, desegregating schools. So there was that was an interesting period, and we look back on it, I suppose, particularly if you think about like the very, very earliest season of Mad Men, a kind of white picket fence, and everything seems okay on the surface, but then underneath it's all very dirty, and you get the impression that Russell T Davies really wants to make a point to an American audience, perhaps through the Disney connection, and it's landed at a particularly apposite time, one might say, I suppose, even if it wasn't necessarily intended or perhaps wanted by Russell T Davies that this would be landing in the second Trump administration. But it's just an interesting aesthetic, and I think large and I think sort of socio-political choice to have it so heavy in that sort of vein. I thought that was interesting. But I haven't talked about whether I liked this or whether it dramatically worked. The Robot Revolution has sort of I've managed to avoid commenting on the Robot Revolution so far in the little roundup I've given there. But I'll bounce the ball back to you. The whole point of I'll Explain Now is that we give a wildly overbaked, hugely hot, sizzling take.
Yeah.
What is yours, Matt, on this episode?
I did not like this very much at all, to be honest. Which is a shame, which is disappointing, because I was very excited to see it. I can sort of pick apart my disappointment with it really into sort of two strands. The main one is, taken on its own terms as a piece of TV that I sat down to watch last night. I felt pretty much all of it, the dramatic stakes of it, just felt massively unearned. Almost at every level, really. It was as exposition heavy as I think Doctor Who gets. And I say that, when obviously this is our primary criticism of the Chris Chibnall era, that rather than showing, Chibnall's mode is very much to tell. And this tells all the way. It's incredibly talky for something that also has a lot going on in terms of music and visuals and all sorts of other bits and pieces. But it seems to be reaching to an emotional stake, which, I mean, look, and we've snarked in the past about the sort of have a drink when Shooty cries, etc. But the whole but I mean, absolutely, completely sozzled by the end of this. But I mean, at the heart of it, there's this, and one of the things that emerges at the core of this is the Doctor has obviously been on the planet Miss Belinda Chandra 1 for 6 months and has formed quite a close relationship with one of the rebels there, Sasha, who is dispatched in relatively short order at the start of the episode. And this obviously affects the Doctor quite a lot, and is also
Well,
sort of,
the script tells us that he's affected,
well, this is it.
and
I
he
mean,
does
it's
his best,
he
but
does his best, but it's so like, we've had 30 seconds of screen time with her, and we sort of have to take it on trust, really, that this is a deep relationship that affects the Doctor badly. Now, obviously this sort of thing is what the story is sort of gesturing towards in the relationship between the Doctor and his new companion Belinda. And I think obviously we'll come on to sort of where we feel that relationship is going and where we feel it's shaping up, because obviously all of that's in the future. We don't know yet how this arc is going to play out. But I think it is quite interesting that in the conversation they have in the TARDIS at the end, the Doctor's making this solemn promise that I'll keep you safe and take you home, and Belinda rightly is sort of skeptical, saying like, well, I'm sure you made similar promises to Sasha, and Sasha is now dead. But in terms of where the story plays its beats, it's like, if we're meant to feel that this relationship that the Doctor has had with Sasha is so sort of primal to the emotional undercurrent of the episode, the fact that, I mean, she literally has 30 seconds of screen time and makes I have to say, no more impression than any of the other rebels that we see in this episode, feels like the emphasis is all in the wrong place. And then we get to sort of, and this is essentially my biggest beef with the episode, is that where it plays its hand in the sort of revelation of what is going on at the heart of all of this, it's revealed that Belinda has been brought to Miss Belinda Chandra 1 as part of some sort of essentially arranged marriage to end the robot war with a giant AI computer, basically, to create this human cyborg relationship. And what's revealed is that inside this is Alan, her old ex-boyfriend from when she was a teenager, who has sort of dwelled on this relationship and obviously has a, let's say, somewhat regressive view of women, and wants to sort of control that relationship. The episode makes a huge point of saying that, she's rejecting this kind of coercive control, and she uses that phrase. She said, like, I can't remember the exact line, but she says something like, I've heard of coercive control, but this is ridiculous. And then there's a Planet of the Incels sort of crack. But again, this is like, and this is at the denouement of the episode. This is what we're sort of told it's all about. But again, it's telling, not showing. The episode is not about that until suddenly it decides that it is going to be about that. And we only see that Alan was a bad dude in flashback, essentially, because all we've seen of him prior to that is that he's a bit of a dork and a bit awkward, and maybe he buys her a sort of slightly lame present. But there's nothing to indicate in what we know about him in the story so far. So, and this sort of really bugs me, because I sort of commend this era of the show for coming out swinging in terms of wanting to put a pin in I think sort of really important issues of the day. And AdisResic has sort of said in a ton of interviews this week, we'll know we're doing something right if we start seeing Dr. Woke headlines, because, that's what we really want this era of the show to be about. We're up front with the sort of progressive agenda. But I think, as always with these things, if you're going to do it, do it. It's like, we have said on countless occasions, like, listeners to this podcast know what our politics are, that, you and I are both
both of them.
Yeah, both of them know both of our politics, and that we are very much the liberal progressive left. And we have also said on many occasions that we consider Doctor Who to be a progressive show, or certainly at least a liberal show, and quite often a progressive show. And I have absolutely no issue with the show sort of giving voice to social issues from a progressive perspective. I have no problem with that. I welcome that. That's what I want my Doctor Who to be doing. And we are in an era where that puts a target on your back, essentially. I think that might be something to sort of discuss further down the line, as sort of where I mean, you alluded to the second Trump presidency. This is a very different cultural context, even in which, the show was, this episode would have been written and made. But I kind of think, just to address the issues literally by referencing them and doing nothing more with it, is the most kind of hollow way of talking about this kind of stuff, that it's really empty. And I think that then does leave you open to charges of virtue signaling, because it's got nothing. The script has got nothing to say about coercive control and incel culture other than that these things are bad. But it's almost just like, well, we've referenced that as a box to tick, and then we move on in a story that sort of otherwise seems relatively unconcerned with these issues. And for me, that just left a really nasty taste in the mouth, because, you know, there is, I mean, we are existing in a culture at the moment that is unraveling largely because of, you know, a backlash and a psychodrama from men who can't sort of accept a new, more equitable version of the world. You know, it's like Doctor Who potentially has something important to say here, and just to reduce it just to this sort of hollow line that you kind of throw away, it really put me off. And yeah, I found that really disappointing. I would also add, and sorry, I realize I've gone on at length here, so I want to get your perspective on this, but I would also add that Doctor Who did do a coercive control storyline in a story to introduce a new companion back in 1964, when they did the first ever introduction of a new companion, with the introduction of Vicky, who is in an incredibly well-drawn coercive situation with Bennett, who's pretending to be Kikilian in order to keep her, you know, keep her under his thumb.
This is the rescue.
This is the rescue, yeah, absolutely. And you know, and the Doctor comes in to actually help her escape that situation. And you know, to see that the show 61 years ago landed a better read on that particular subject than it manages to here in 2025 is bracing. So anyway, I've got a couple of other sort of reservations about this, but they're sort of second order concerns.
Yeah, I mean,
But John, I'll throw to you on this.
I mean, I agree with everything you said. I feel that the manosphere, toxic masculinity, the woke backlash, and how that ties into the socio-political, macroeconomic, even after the fallout of the last week or so, landscape that we find ourselves in. This is rich territory. And yeah, okay, Russell T Davies did not know that there was going to be a second Trump presidency when this was written and recorded, but these are very live themes, and it's, you know, their pertinence continues, and it would have been the case regardless of the circumstances. I think it's these issues, the manosphere, toxic masculinity, are just too important for the drive-by attention afforded to them here. It reminded me in a weird way of like a Family Guy episode where they get a laugh by mentioning a member of the Brat Pack, right? It's like, you know, hey, just like that time Rob Lowe did this, and like there'll be a picture of Rob Lowe in a bar or whatever, right? And it's like, in the same way, this is sort of it's ticking the boxes by referring to these things without actually really doing much work. And I think one of the things and just back to the point that you made really early on about show don't tell, as sort of, you know, good advice for television and for drama overall. It was just that kind of Planet of the Incels line and the direct reference to coercive control. I'm not saying you literally can't use those words, but it felt a bit like one of those 19th century Punch cartoons where, you know, like the satchel has to be labeled Schleswig-Holstein, because just in case the person looking at the picture doesn't work out what's going on. It's like, this isn't obvious enough because we haven't really laid the groundwork, because we haven't actually given you a hint of Al's true nature at the very beginning. We're sort of having to lay it on with a trowel at this point because it hasn't really, as you said earlier, been earned. It hasn't, the dramatic foundations haven't really been laid. And so you end up in a position where, yes, okay, if you're watching, you probably would have got it. But just in case anyone is watching this on a Saturday night with the family around and bits have been lost while someone went to the Breville sandwich toaster, they've had to specifically say that, and it just feels very, as you said, unearned. I think is the right way to put it. I think that in general, and you referenced the rescue. I think that's absolutely spot on. It hadn't even occurred to me, and that. But yeah, the rescue is, what is that about? It's about extracting someone from a coercive, controlled relationship, and I think and they don't reference it specifically in those terms at all. I mean, they wouldn't have done anyway, because that language, that lexicon, didn't exist. But in general, and we spoke about this as well with the Zygon invasion, the Zygon inversion, that I think that sometimes well constructed allegory, given that Doctor Who is such a heightened, high concept environment, I think that well built allegory often lands better than very on the nose agitprop, labels going by, this is what this is about. Where Doctor Who is concerned. And I just, as I say, as you say, I feel that this is, if you're going to get those Daily Mail headlines, let's bloody earn them, right? Let's have this really out in the open, as opposed to just sort of ticking a box. And I felt this was a tick the box issue raising of a quite a lazy kind. And one of the reasons why it has to tick the box like that is because this episode has to do some things like introduce Belinda and get them into the TARDIS, and that setup is both well drawn and empty. So we get to see Belinda in, she's obviously competent, she's obviously fiery, she has, to quote another franchise, a particular set of skills in terms of being a nurse and being very adept and bringing that to the fore. That's great. You cut to the flat share scenario with the fridge, which gives you a sense of the kind of precarity of even professional lifestyles in this day and age. That she's she has all this expertise, but she's still having to sort of label stuff in a fridge and find manky shit in it. That's great, but then the essential character beat of her is she wants to get home. She wants to get home. She references her mum and dad, and I feel like in order for us to care about Belinda getting home, we would need to have more personal roots into her present. Like, she mentions her mum and dad. Like, we would have needed, and RTD1 would have given us, and indeed did in series 1 with Ruby and her mum, just something. Throw me a bone. Give me anything. Like, we get more screen time for Sasha 55 than we do for people Belinda knows, right? In the here and now. Yes, okay, Alan doesn't count because he's someone from her past, but someone from her present who actually cares about her or roots her or raises the stakes a bit for why it's important she gets home. That's the kind of dramatic beat I thought Russell T Davies lived for. And it's nowhere. So she's sort of well sketched, but she remains quite empty. And I'm surprised to be saying that when I know how good Russell T Davies typically has been at precisely this kind of thing. And it can't really decide whether, is this here to be a bit of a romp? Like, I was getting very Star Beast vibes of this, particularly the arrival of the robots in the domestic setting. I mean, literally bursting into the hall, which is very similar to the kind of raid scene, albeit with, I think, Unit or whatever, but like very similar to the raid scene in Star Beast. And right down to the kind of the dead cat bit where they sizzle a cat felt like an attempt to somehow give you a comic beat that reached the heights of Tuna Madras. But like something of that humor of the dislocation between what's happening and the crazily domestic setting. There was an attempt to give you some humor, to give you some spectacle. There was even a little bit of beefcake in Max Parker's Manny. I'll come back to that in a second. But ultimately, he couldn't really decide. Is it meant to be a romp? Is it meant to be a character introduction to Belinda? Is it meant to be a sort of exploration of how, with the wrong kind of inputs, someone geeky and a bit awkward, like, many Doctor Who fans might find themselves in that position. I certainly was geeky and awkward as a teenager. A lot of people are. With the wrong kind of inputs, they can end down a very dark path. I mean, I guess it tries to do all of those things, and it does none of them well. And it just doesn't ultimately decide, well, you know what, this episode is this, and we're sticking with that.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say, just finally, is that, while the jury is out for me on Varada Sethu, and I felt she was good, and there's no but coming around that. She was good. The but is around, I just don't see what she was I don't see what she could have done with what she was given. I mean, her major dramatic beat is somewhere in the middle, where she's in the rebel base and she decides to switch on the little robot to be detected, because she decides, well, these people are all being killed because of me, so let them take me. And it's not at all clear to me that it would be necessary for her to do that, or, like, the sacrifice she's making doesn't seem to fit with any analysis of what's actually going on. And so it just felt like Russell T Davies was insisting on her being both hot-headed and willing to sacrifice herself and use this, but it didn't actually fit with the plot. It didn't also fit with the plot that Manny, who I mentioned previously, the kind of beefcake character, blamed her for everything. Like, why? I mean, it's clearly not her fault. Maybe she could be the solution to it. It just didn't sort of thread together in plot terms, and it seemed to be trying to do three distinct things. Bit of fun, introduce the character, and bit of sort of political commentary. And by trying to keep all three of those things all three of those plates in the air, it didn't seem to focus on any one of them, and I think they all came crashing down, frankly.
I think you sort of touched on a good point there, actually, which kind of gets into my I sort of said I had two big reservations about it. It sort of slightly gets into my second one, which is that, thinking about, well, what is this actually for, and what is this trying to do as 45 minutes of television? And I mean, part of but prior to it sort of revealing its hand as to what it wanted us to believe the story was about, with the coercive control aspect of it, I wasn't really with it up until then, to be honest, partly because of the sort of unearned dramatic stakes, and partly just because of the extreme over familiarity of the sort of vibe of this episode. This is absolutely your straight out of the box Russell T Davies season opener. Okay, it's aiming for exactly the same tone as Rose, New Earth, Smith and Jones, Partners in Crime, and the Star Beast, to be honest. And it's like none of which I could rank those in varying orders, but none of which I would describe as my favorite episodes, or even the best episodes of those particular runs. But it does point to the sort of slightly weird space that Doctor Who finds itself in 2025, which is that, launching with an episode of this mold, right? So, and by this mold, I mean very much the fairly low stakes adventure that is a bit of a jape, bit of a breeze, and introduces mainly a new companion, but sometimes a new Doctor as well, right? That has a very clear purpose when Doctor Who is primarily a show for Saturday nights as part of an entertainment lineup, aiming at something that we squarely understand to be a mainstream audience and trying to pick people off from ITV, right? The point of opening the run with a story like Rose versus a story like, Dalek or The Empty Child is to say to the audience, do you know what? This isn't sort of some impenetrable sci-fi bullshit that comes with a ton of lore. This is just a breezy laugh and you might want to stick around, okay? The thing is, in 2025, most mainstream entertainment is impenetrable sci-fi lore now, and that's kind of where the mainstream is at. It's like, if you look at the cinema, like, the majority of what you'll see in the cinema is like Marvel movies that you need to have seen the previous 30 in order to understand remotely what's going on. So one, it's sort of playing slightly to a non-existent audience, because who is going to who is going to be converted by this? Who's going to arrive at this that doesn't know anything about Doctor Who and want to stick around, for more on this basis? So there's that. The other thing that is worth noting is that the show is only on 8 weeks of the year now rather than 13, which, so it's lost 5 episodes. And I think in that sense, and that's the difference, I think, between like a series that can do a whole bunch of different things and throw different tones at you sort of every single week, and something that feels much more of a sort of mini series in a way, something that like each part of this story has to like pull some weight essentially. And yes, obviously this sets up a bunch of ongoing threads that we will be revisiting. I mean, the RTD2 is far more sort of arc intensive, I think, than RTD1. This much is becoming apparent. But, if we're going to put some numbers on it, 12.5% of the amount of Doctor Who that we're going to get this year has essentially been used on like throat clearing, basically, in terms of just like throwing some stuff at the screen. And I sort of like, Davis structures series to a familiar pattern. Like the structure of last year's series felt very familiar, albeit compressed and truncated from how he structured his much longer series, 20 years ago. But it's just I don't if I'm getting 8 episodes of Doctor Who a year, I don't want one of them to essentially be throwaway. And I know that's always the risk with Doctor Who, that you roll the dice every week. But I just sort of feel that, I don't know, it's that's sort of falling between all the stools for me. It's like, what is this for? What is this meant to do? And why have we spent so much time and money on something that essentially doesn't feel like it's meant to be any great shakes?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that Doctor Who is in something of a bind, because on the one hand, you've got, as you say, the kind of marvelization of people really liking all this intricate lore and following it through to its natural conclusion, knowing the back history, watching 30 stories, 30 films perhaps, to have that kind of weight of knowledge behind what's going on now. And at the same time, which I think has been, again, people's mileage may vary as to how entertaining they personally find this stuff, but it's certainly commercially successful enough to continue in its current vein, and artistically coherent enough that the backlash has been relatively muted, that if you want to then splinter off into different directions, well, you've got your multiverses for that, so you don't have to worry about screwing the continuity, because this is a whole different timeline, and that keeps everybody happy, quote unquote. And so you've got that now exists in the world of entertainment and fantasy, and it runs counter to everything that Doctor Who was brought back to believe, right? So when Doctor Who was brought back in 2005, although we did eventually, as you always say, get to the tachyon beam is down around Gallifrey, and sort of it's a singularity moment, all Doctor Who must end up there at the converge there. But nonetheless, there's a sort of feeling Doctor Who is quite embarrassed, or can be quite embarrassed by the weight of its 60 years of accumulated lore and continuity and backstory and all the rest of it. So on the one hand, you've got a prevailing trend within the wider entertainment industry, and even within the Disney firmament that Doctor Who now finds itself within. And Doctor Who sort of going, I'm not really sure that's for me. And yet I feel like I feel that Doctor Who artistically is treading water, basically. Like, so you've got Belinda Chandra, rather than going, you know what, we cast Varada Sethu last year. She was really good. She's been in Andor. Disney have heard of her. She's great. Let's bring her back. And you know what? She's in another episode. So what? No. There has to be a whole bloody story. It has to be another Impossible Girl narrative. And, we've had Bad Wolf and Rose being the save of the universe. We've had the Impossible Girl. We've had the Dr. Donna. Now we've got Belinda. We had Ruby Sunday's story, and they tried to pull the rug from under us by saying, oh, actually she wasn't the most important person in the universe, she was just the daughter of somebody or whatever. And I'm just, do you know what, I'm just done with this.
Yeah.
It's like Doctor Who has a box of tricks, and it needs a new playpen. It needs a new playpen. It needs fresh ideas, and the mystery of the person who's joined, and the kind of this desire to set up this mystery, as you say, 8 episodes, so 12.5% has been taken up by setting up this person, setting up this mystery, clearing its throat. It's so focused on that it doesn't stick the landing of here and now. What am I looking at? What am I looking at on the television? What is the story that's being told? So when I think about, I feel like if culture is zigging in terms of, right, more backstory, more lore, then Doctor Who got there in 2005, right? Slightly early to the party, in fact, and it needs to zag. And I feel like if it's only going to be 8 episodes, probably it should do a single story with, a kind of Dalek's Master Plan-esque anthology working towards an end, whereby in order to put the pieces of the puzzle together, you need to go to ancient Egypt and this and that and the far future and this and that. So you get your individual adventures while clearly being on something of a mission.
I am very insistent on the point that what I would actually like to see from this sort of more truncated streaming era Doctor Who is flux but good. It's basically, it's that flux but good. It's like, as a structure for how to do a short season of Doctor Who, I think Flux absolutely nailed it. The problem was that a lot of the individual episodes were not very good. But that's what I want.
I completely agree. That's it.
Yeah, that's it.
That's what and that's what's forced upon you. It's what's demanded. I mean, the alternative is to go the poker face route and say, no, this is, one thing that's really missing in the culture at the moment is, and even that has a little bit of a running thread, but I mean, but you really don't need to. You can imagine Poker Face being syndicated, catching an episode and going, oh well, villain of the week. The other way to zag would be to just say, you know what the culture lacks at the moment is syndicated style, single episode, one and done drama.
Yeah.
But I feel like trying to do a 13 episode season in 8 episodes, right down to the introduction of a character who may be the most important person who's ever traveled with the Doctor, is doing my fucking head in.
I mean, and that's really it. This is nothing that we have not seen before. And the execution of it this time around, we may well on aggregate look at this series and say, well, this is a bit better or a bit worse than some of the many other times that we've seen it done before. But yeah, there's it feels like there's nothing new on the table here. The one thing that I would sort of add as a caveat is that, I thought that one of the things that I did feel that was new, certainly for modern production of Doctor Who last year, was how odd it was prepared to be at times, in terms of just putting on some strange and I think sometimes very affecting telly. So I would say that part of I would largely co-sign everything you've just said. The familiarity of it is that, for me, is that it's the season opener where nobody has to try too hard, right? And I can let that go in a 13 episode run. I'm a bit more worried about it in an 8 episode run. What it doesn't do is give me any I go into the rest of the series almost from a position of neutrality now, in that it neither worries me about what we're about to see, nor does it massively excite me for what we're about to see. because it's another RTD season opener, for better or for worse. And I would say that, last year's series obviously opened with Space Babies, which I think nobody's going to claim as a great classic. Nor was it indeed indicative of the heights that series would scale. And I think, some of Doctor Who 2024, I think, it definitely produced at least one, maybe two episodes that I would put in Doctor Who's top table. So, I'm broadly excited for the possibility of what we might see over the coming weeks. But equally, there is nothing laid out here that makes me think, oh yeah, we're in for a slam dunk.
No, I think that's right. I mean, I think, but essentially, the lumpiness that we saw in season one, the first Shooty Gatwa season, broadly speaking, on the evidence of this one episode, it looks like we're going to get a similarly lumpy approach. I really missed Ruby. Like I was watching this at the beginning of an 8-episode run. And I mean, no disrespect to Varada Setu or her the Belinda Chandra character or whatever, but like I did feel to myself sort of asking, why are we introducing a new character? We've just got to know Ruby Sunday, and I'm sort of, particularly in a truncated era, it does feel like she just disappeared. I know she's coming back. I know, but 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 why we didn't get to the real estate to get to know these characters and then bang, you're off straight into an adventure is so much shorter now.
Yeah.
I feel that it was a misstep not to sustain a single central relationship over the two series that have been agreed with Disney. I'd be fascinated to know whether this was simply Russell T Davies personally himself dramatically feeling as he did with, well, unwittingly to a certain extent, but he changed a main character every season he ran it first time round. The first one was forced on him, it has to be said, but he did. And I wonder whether he just felt right to keep the press, to keep people interested. This is a flex I do. This is what I do. This is my thing. Or whether there was a bit more going on in terms of Millie Gibson's performance and what they felt about it. I don't know. I know there's been tabloid noises off. I'm not giving any credence to that or anything. But I'm just interested in the decision, given there's so little real estate to play with in terms of telling a story with these characters, why they've decided to turn on a sixpence.
And you point to another thing about the sort of slightly weird place that Doctor Who finds itself in the streaming era is obviously sort of the length of time that it makes to make TV now, and especially make TV at this scale with this level of resources in it, has a slightly sort of inverse effect on what actually lands on the screen. Because if you think the Disney deal was announced in sort of autumn 2021, Shooting Out was casting sort of summer 2022. They shot series 1 and 2 more or less back to back. So apparently it was like a 4-week gap between series, and then they plugged straight on, which meant that we knew that Millie Gibson was leaving, I think more or less before we'd even saw that she had appeared in her first episode. And in a way, it's that sort of that length of time. And, and the BBC publicity department do a brilliant job of like basically from the point where the Disney deal was announced, there's been a sort of steady trickle of like media coverage and, actors appearing on the one show to sort of hype it up, and casting announcements and, on-set photography and all of these kind of things. Doctor Who from 2021 onwards has felt like quite a busy world. But after all of that, when it eventually arrives on the screen, you kind of think, was this it? And it's like, and what I don't have is a sort of preference or a remedy for that, because, and this is something that I'm sure, we've gone far longer on this opening episode than we initially planned to. I'm sure this is something that we'll discuss across the run, but the state of television in 2025 is sort of all up for grabs, really. I think, broadly, all the eggs have been put into a streaming drama basket over the last few years. And to massively mix my metaphors, that bubble, looks like it's about to pop, essentially. So the entire question, and if this is the last bit of Doctor Who that we see, if this run is the last bit of Doctor Who we see for a while, I'm sure there'll be a ton of fan gnashing their teeth about, well, this is, an example of Russell T Davies running it into the ground with, X or Y creative decisions. But, it won't be. It will be because of the sheer bloody economics of making TV now being so uncertain and no one really knowing where the money is coming from for Doctor Who or for anything. So, Doctor Who, where Doctor Who finds itself is largely symptomatic of like where a lot of TV, particularly British TV, finds itself like at the moment. But yeah, it does sort of feel like, I remember when we were looking at I was looking through the details of Last Christmas when we were looking, when we did that, last Christmas, as part of our Christmas special. And the read through for that episode, occurred only a few months, I think, towards the end of the year that it was going to be broadcast in. Like they were doing a read through and filming sort of around October, and it was on TV in December. You go back to the Hartnell era, it was pretty much being made within the week of transmission. And now, we've got this massively long window, whereas I say, and as you alluded to right at the top, and this might be a good place to put a bow on it, it's being broadcast in a massively different cultural context to the one in which it was made. And you can't help but feel that for all of the activity and for all of the resources, when you actually get down to watching the episode of Doctor Who, you kind of go, okay.
Yeah. And, it seems vanishingly unlikely that Disney, in the current political context, would have sanctioned the casting of an LGBT plus actor in the central role of a tentpole piece of IP for them.
Yeah.
Like it's just that's not where Disney is right now.
No, absolutely not.
So that this has come out. If you'll pardon the pun, this has come out at a time that's quite uncomfortable for them. I get the impression that they're not really giving it much of a push. The Disney deal seems all but dead, and the question is what then the BBC does to sustain Doctor Who, and it'll want to keep it going in some way, shape, or form. I suppose to use a kind of to bastardize a currently apposite phrase, I feel it's make Doctor Who small again. Maybe it should be telling stories that speak to that aim their fire at a British audience and that gain broader global recognition by virtue of being authentically of this place.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that Russell T Davies isn't doing this, but I feel that and you're the one who's made this point best, I feel that in trying to basically recreate his golden era by which I mean 2005 through to 2010, in this particular moment of television, it's just glitching a bit.
Yeah, I fully agree. Well, look, let's put a bow on it there. But if only to say that obviously, this has been possibly slightly more downbeat than we might have anticipated when we said.
So I'm looking forward to next week.
Yeah, we'll cover the new series as it goes out. But unlike many people who I'm sure will be throwing their toys out of the pram and saying they'll never watch Doctor Who again, we will be watching this series week in, week out, and
we have to, whether we want to or not.
Absolutely, we've chained ourselves to the content treadmill here, and we will be talking about it. And who knows? As I say, this is very much an attempt to put a marker in how we feel right now watching new Doctor Who. That could change in a few weeks. That could change in a few years. So who knows? But anyway, in the meantime, we would love to hear what you thought about all of the issues that we've raised, but in particular, what you thought of the robot revolution. If you want to get in touch with us, there are basically two good ways to get in touch with us, right? It's either to send us an email, and I have really enjoyed the uptick of lovely emails that we've had, including some recently. Recently, people have written to us, and when normal service resumes and we're looking at crusty old TV from decades ago, in a couple of months' time, we'll get to those. But if you want to email us, you can email us hello@I'llExplainLater.com. And if you want to, thank you. Even across the international time lag, you managed to get that joke in. And if you want to get in touch with us via socials, it's Blue Sky is basically the place to do it. Just search for I'll Explain Later on Blue Sky, and you can talk to us there. But otherwise, stick with it, guys. Come on, it's surely the next couple of months have going to get better. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching and listening, and we will be back with you next week for another conversation about very, very recent Doctor Who.
Till then, goodbye.